Hey everybody, it's Dorward here at the Spartan Rocketry Club, continuing our Black Brant 12 build. This video is going to be mostly kind of like some housekeeping and continual work. No real new steps, but there's a lot of stuff that I've been kind of doing somewhat off camera. So for instance, I still have a few more of these fins to construct, but this one in particular is worth looking at because you'll notice that there's a noticeable gap in this one. Now, I could break out my wood fill here, but that's probably not worth it with a gap of these dimensions here. It's not that bad. So instead of using wood fill, I'm just going to put some glue in there to fill in the crack. That's way more glue than I need. But yeah, so I'm just going to paint the glue with my finger to make sure it's in the crack. And then just kind of, I don't want, oh, there's a bubble. Don't want any bubbles. And then I'm just going to kind of smooth it out. Just remember, this doesn't need to be a particularly good finish because I'm going to have to sand it a lot in the near future. Hopefully in the next episode. But in any event, that one, yeah, that one's basically done. This is the last of these, and it occurred to me that I actually haven't built one on camera. So these are pretty straightforward. I'm going to use a whole lot less glue than I had been using. There we go. And my nozzle is kind of clogged. That's fun. You really don't need much glue for this. And you definitely want to be spreading it thin here. And instead of using my finger, I've been using this scrap of balsa here that is kind of wide at one end. So it works a bit like a paintbrush. I guess you could use paintbrush if you really wanted to, but probably not necessary. So just make sure you get the glue spread out thoroughly. In truth, you probably don't need to put glue all over the entire piece of balsa. You'd probably be okay just putting it along the edges. So that's where it needs to hold more than anything else. But the idea, at least in part, of laminating this is the lamination makes the whole thing stronger. So might as well put the glue everywhere. All right, so here we go. I'm going to line them up and hold them tight. Again, I didn't bother to sand these after I cut them out to try to get the burrs because actually, in spite of that one that I just showed you that had the seam running through it, these have actually had less seam, noticeable seam anyway, than the bigger ones, which could be for a variety of reasons, but considering that I sanded them and it didn't really seem to make things better, in fact, it seemed to make things a little bit worse, I feel pretty confident in my decision to not bother sanding the burrs off of this side. Now, I do eventually need to sand the burrs off, say, the top, but I'm not going to do that right now. Notice, too, by the way, this is bowed really badly right now. The moisture in the glue is causing the wood to warp, which is why we definitely need to do these both at the same time and quickly. So putting another layer of glue on the other side of the balsa should counteract or at least encourage the wood to bend back in the other direction. There are kits out there. I haven't built one recently. It's not as prevalent a thing anymore, but there are definitely kits out there where you purposefully warp the wood. And there are a variety of ways to do that, but I mean, the most basic one is to get the wood wet and then try to like mold it in the shape that you want. Now, we of course don't want the wood warped. We want this nice and straight, which is part of the reason that we're going to put weight on it. And I suspect by the way, that the crack that developed in that one, I'm pretty sure that developed in the side that I did first. So that could be because I put it in place and then I flipped it over and then I kind of jostled it, or it could be because um, the the wood warped in the wrong direction after I applied things. So not really 100% on that. There's a little bit of a crack developing on this side too. So unclear, but it's fairly easy to fix, and the little bit of glue there should be more than enough to fill in that crack. All right, I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to put my weight on it. That's the last one of those, fortunately, so the next video I can start processing them. All right, what else? Well, I removed all the caps from these things, and this one ended up getting split apart. So I had to remove 3 things from this, one piece here and one piece here, and they were about as awful as that first one that I cut out. In fact, this last one, I went and got my Dremel tool and cut it off because I was really tired of doing this at this point. Now, the cut that the Dremel tool makes is wider, so I certainly am not going to use it for the next step. And it's harder to control because the blade kind of like, well, it's spinning, so it wants to drive itself, and it may not be going in the direction you want. But again, this is going to be hidden inside of a tube, like so. So the fact that this cut, I mean, it's not bad, but the fact that it's not as good as the ones I did by hand is really quite irrelevant. All right, so the next bit of business, and I've already done one of these, is the fins, not these fins go into this part of the plastic. But in order to do that, of course, you need to cut this part out. Yeah, and that seems like a pretty unpleasant prospect, to be honest with you. And the first one I did actually wasn't anywhere near as bad as cutting out the other bits of plastic. So let's do one of those. Now, the first thing I'm going to do here, oh, this one's on a seam, so this one's going to be exciting, is I'm going to score down here at the bottom. I'm going to put I'm going to try to cut it across like 5 times or so just to have a good notch there, and I'm going to do the same at the top. And the reason that I'm doing this tiny bit first is because it should end. Ooh, I'm stuck in the seam. Hold on. There we go. Yeah, this one might be tricky because of the seam. Anyway, next I'm gonna cut like this, and the notches that I put in there hopefully will act as kind of like a starting point and more importantly an ending point. So I'm just gonna cut directly next to this. I'm gonna score it just like I did on the other ones. Not putting too much pressure. I'm not trying to cut through this in one fell swoop. The plastic here actually, and there I go, I've already cut through it. The plastic here feels a lot easier, more easier to cut through, and I'm not entirely sure why that is. It might be that those earlier cuts I made where the plastic was thicker, but I mean, I don't think so. It's also possible that because this is deformed here, in the other direction, it's popped out instead of popped in. There's less material. I'm not entirely sure. But the important thing here is that this wasn't anywhere near as bad as cutting through the big pieces. Be careful. The instructions are very clear. We don't want to cut this off sideways like this. We definitely want to be cutting at a 90-degree angle right next to the little bump. And again, fortunately, and this is, to some degree, this is a more difficult cut because while I am following something that's in the plastic, this bump, it's not a groove this time. It is, in fact, it is the exact opposite. Okay, so I cut through most of that going down, But I know I didn't get through here, so I'm switching it around, keeping my hand out of the way because I know my blade is through. All right. Oh, one other thing. I'm going to put this down for a second. So I already cut this one out. Notice that the through the fin part is significantly bigger than the bump, which is fine. I mean, that's not a problem. It just means there's a gap to work with, and it does fit, fortunately. But I really don't want to make this gap any taller than it needs to be. So the process of then removing this, I've done enough that this is I've cut through, but the last little bit is the hardest, and that's getting the top and the bottom off instead of the sides. And I'm not entirely sure, again, why this is more difficult. It might be like there's a grain to the plastic. I mean, it doesn't seem to be that way, but it seems to be more difficult going this way than going this way, which would explain the difficulty in cutting through the first steps that I did in the last video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I cut down the whole way to the edge here in both directions. So I haven't quite made it this way yet. Same deal over here. And this direction too. Okay. That feels pretty good. So I might be able to pull this off now. Not quite. But I can pull on it a little bit, and I can see where it's still connected. It looks like it's only connected right in here. So I'm just going to focus cutting right there. And I'm just going to go over that a few times, and there, it's free. Just looking at this, I mean, I could definitely pull this off right now. And there it goes. Not too bad. Okay, so that's cut clear, but the first one I did, and this one as well, it's narrow, it's too narrow. So I need to expand it. The instructions recommend that I should get myself a very narrow file, like even a nail file. But first of all, I'm not sure that I have one that's that narrow. In fact, I'm pretty sure I don't. I have a little bit of a scar there, so I'm going to sand that off. All right, so instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just ever so slightly widen this. So I'm going to use my knife blade here. I'm just going to pass it very gently against the edge of my cut, and there I've shaved a little tiny bit off. I doubt that's enough, but yeah, still not quite enough. So I'm going to shave a little bit off the other side now. Again, you don't want to remove much here. Any excess that you remove, you're going to have to fill back in later. And this is probably more than I needed. So that's closer, but it's actually too narrow at the top now, so apparently didn't make a particularly straight cut there. So I'm just going to shave the slightest bit off there. Okay, that's good. And it fits in nicely. So I've got 2 more on this thing. There are 4 more to cut here, and 4 more to cut here. So that's going to keep me busy for a while. The only other bit of somewhat important stuff that I need to do that I kind of neglected was, if you recall, I built this thing last time. I glued the 2 pieces of wood together. I need to round this. So normally I would use the sanding block and go over it like this, but I'm somewhat concerned that if I do that, I'm going to end up snapping it because I'm going to be putting a bit of force on it, and it's not the strongest piece of material. So I'm gonna try using just the sandpaper down on the ground, and I'm I'm going to kind of rotate the thing slowly. And I'm only going to be doing 1/2 at a time. Actually, I'm only doing like 1/4 of it at a time because I'm only doing one side and not even 1/3 of it, or maybe 1/3 of it. This is going to take a bit of time to sand this in properly because I do need to remove a good amount of material here to get this rounded properly. And it's not going to be particularly exact, I don't think. It would be nice if it was a perfect hemisphere when I was done with it, but I think that's probably not going to happen. It's just, I would like it to be rounded. That's my goal here. All right, so looking at it, I've removed, actually I didn't really remove much from the top at all, so let's get that sanded down just by itself here. That's actually easier to do because I have less to worry about. So I have rounded it, but I've rounded maybe like halfway down. And you can, again, we talked about this in making these little pieces, the little decorative parts. Because this is laser cut, the balsa is scarred, it's burned. And you can see how far you've gone. So I've gone maybe about halfway. I've rounded it about halfway. So this is going to take some time. I'm going to have to continue sanding it, but you really don't need to watch. This is basically what it's going to look like. Right? So just slowly but surely putting a rounding off the corners. That's the word I'm looking for. Let's at least try to get one piece right. And that's not, it's not as far as the instructions want. I don't actually know that I'm going to round it the whole way down to get rid of all the black, but I suppose I probably should. And just, I said I wasn't going to do this, but is this any better? I mean, honestly, it's kind of awkward to be doing it. I really don't want to be doing more in this at a given time anyway. So I'm pretty pleased with my decision to use the sandpaper on the ground like this on the mat. Just keep rotating the piece of wood back and forth, and you should get a fairly nice rounded side to it. And yeah, again, the top part, for whatever reason, it's probably because I'm not putting as much pressure on the end of it because that's not where my hand is. Yeah, that's better. I've gotten it down to about, I don't know, 2/3, maybe 3/4 of the way through it. So a little bit more. Put my finger up here, maybe that'll help keep this consistent. Keep the pressure consistent so the curve in this ends up consistent. It's quite good right about here. It's still a little suspect here at the end for whatever reason. All right, I can live with that. So about this much of the rod is now properly rounded. Yeah, so I'm just going to have to just move down and focus on different spots slowly but surely to get my way through this. And I'm certainly not going to do all of this on camera. That would be painfully uninteresting. It's somewhat uninteresting as it is, but yeah, this will be another slow but sure process. One other thing, just because we need to make a standoff for the launch lug. So one of the launch lugs is going to go like right next to a fin here. The other one is going to have to go. No, on that bit. It's going to have to go like right in here somewhere. So those are obviously not going to match up. So we need a little standoff. This is really, really easy to do. All we need is to put a little glue on one of these two bits. This is actually probably not enough glue. Yeah, it's close. Again, this isn't structural. It's not even decorative. So all we need to do is glue these two things together so the launch lug has enough, well, it'll be raised above that next bit of body tube so that the two bits of the launch lug will meet. Once this is dry, I'm going to sand it because there are some burrs in it. Yeah, that's fine. There are actually 4 of these little pieces of wood. Why that is, I don't know. I think the deal is that the laser cut sheet was in like one of these pieces. I think it was in that sheet of balsa, and I think they just cut that one twice and figured, who cares? No reason to make a second computer program for the laser cutter when you could just cut 4 of them and be good. All right, so that doesn't need to be weighted. It's not really quite terribly important. It just needs to be fairly well lined up, which it is, so it can sit there and dry. All right, so between now and the next video, I'm going to cut the remaining tabs out of this and this and this. I have the last fin needs to be made. I actually haven't made the rest of these yet either, so there's a bit of work to do before then. So I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.